It was 1:03 a.m. when the pounding on my door ripped through the silence like a scream. I jolted awake, disoriented, my heart hammering in my chest. For a second, I thought it was just the wind slapping the porch, until I heard the voice, thin, trembling, desperate. "Emma, please open up!" I knew that voice. I threw the blanket aside and stumbled toward the door. When I opened it, my sister Sarah collapsed into my arms. Her body went limp, her skin ice cold. The porch light cast a harsh glow over her face. Her left eye was swollen shut, her lips split open, and dried blood streaked down her chin. The white of her blouse was stained red and purple. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. He hit me. Because of her." My mind froze. I caught her before she hit the floor, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to her trembling body and the metallic scent of blood. "Sarah who did this," I whispered, though I already knew. "Ethan," she gasped. "He hit me because of Denise." My brother-in-law's name sliced through my chest like a blade. Denise, the woman I'd seen once at Ethan's company party, all red lips and cold smiles. The Mistress. I felt my stomach twist with nausea and fury. "Oh my God, Sarah," I whispered, pressing a towel against her mouth, trying to stop the bleeding. "You need a hospital." She clutched my wrist, her eyes wide with terror. "No hospital. Please. He'll find me." Her voice cracked into sobs. "He said if I talked, he'd take the kids. He'd make me disappear." The words dropped like stones, heavy, suffocating. I looked at her shaking hands, nails, broken knuckles raw. The night air bit into my skin, but all I could feel was heat rising inside me, and anger so sharp it burned. "He hit you because of another woman," I muttered, the disbelief turning into rage. I pulled her inside, locking the door, lowering her onto the couch. Her phone slipped from her pocket, lighting up the room. Ethan's name flashed across the screen again and again, 10 missed calls, then a message. "If you open your mouth, you'll lose everything." My throat tightened. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall, but I didn't. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. This wasn't just violence. It was control, domination, terror disguised as love. I wiped her face gently, but every touch revealed new bruises on her collarbone, her shoulder, her ribs. She flinched each time I moved closer, and that broke me more than anything. Sarah, who once laughed so freely now, looked like a ghost in my living room. I whispered, "You're safe now. He's not going to touch you again." But even as I said it, I felt the lie in my throat. Ethan wasn't done. He'd crossed a line no man should ever cross, and I knew something inside me had shifted forever. I was done being silent. Before that night, I used to think my sister had the perfect life. Sarah was the one who did everything right, married young, had 2 beautiful kids, lived in a neat suburban house with white fences and a swing set. Her husband, Ethan Caldwell, was the man everyone admired. He owned a chain of hardware stores, sponsored local events, and never missed a Sunday service. People in town called them the golden couple. I used to envy her stability. I worked as a freelance designer, living alone in my small apartment on the east side of Austin, while Sarah posted pictures of family breakfasts and vacations in Cabo. But perfection has a sound. It's the silence that hides the screaming. I remember one Thanksgiving when Ethan criticized her for burning the turkey in front of everyone. It seemed harmless, even funny, but I saw the way Sarah's smile froze, how her hands trembled as she tried to laugh it off. Later that night, when I hugged her goodbye, I noticed the sleeve of her cardigan pulled awkwardly down to cover her wrist. "You okay?" I asked quietly. "Yeah, I'm just tired," she said. Her voice was soft, automatic. The next day, she texted me a photo of the kids and a heart emoji as if to erase the discomfort. Over time, she stopped calling. I'd message her and she'd reply days later with short sentences. "Busy. Everything's fine." Once I showed up unannounced, Ethan opened the door with that polite, practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Sarah's resting," he said, standing in the doorway like a guard. I remember the way his cologne hit me sharp, artificial, suffocating. When Sarah finally came out, she looked smaller, like someone had drained the color out of her. "You should have told me you were coming," she whispered. "Ethan doesn't like surprises." I wanted to pull her out of that house right then, but she looked terrified at the idea. That was the first time I realized something was deeply wrong. Still, I convinced myself it was just stress that Sarah was too proud to admit her marriage was collapsing. I buried the worry and told myself she could handle it. But that lie came back to haunt me at 1:03 a.m. when she collapsed at my door broken and bleeding. Every bruise on her skin that night was a confession I had ignored. Every tear was proof that my silence made me complicit. I thought about all the little signs, the canceled brunches, the bruises she blamed on gardening, the way she always checked her phone like someone was tracking her, and I wondered how long had she been trapped while I was busy believing her smile. Looking at her now, unconscious on my couch, I realized the truth. My sister didn't just need saving. She needed someone willing to go to war for her. The living room felt too small to hold everything that was happening. Sarah lay half-conscious on the couch, her breathing shallow, her skin clammy under the yellow light. I fetched the first aid kit from the bathroom and crouched beside her, my hands trembling as I cleaned the blood from her split lip. She flinched when the cloth touched her skin, a small whimper escaping her mouth. "It's okay," I murmured, forcing calm into my voice. "You're safe here." But she wasn't safe, not really. Not until Ethan was out of her life for good. She opened her swollen eye just enough to look at me. "He lost control tonight," she whispered. "He was drinking again." Her words came in fragments. "I asked him about the woman. Denise." He didn't even deny it. He just laughed and said she was younger, easier, less dramatic. Sarah swallowed hard, her voice shaking. "Then he hit me. Again and again. I fell against the counter. I thought he was going to kill me." My throat tightened. I kept wiping the blood from her face, but my vision blurred. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Shame is a prison stronger than bars." "He said he'd take the kids," she whispered. "He said no one would believe me." Her phone vibrated on the table again, lighting up the room with his name, Ethan. The screen flashed with message after message. "You're embarrassing yourself. Don't make me come get you. Stop this now or I'll ruin you." I stared at those words until my hands went cold. He wasn't just violent, he was methodical. Every message was a threat wrapped in manipulation. I picked up her phone, opened the camera, and quietly took photos of her injuries. I knew I'd need proof later. Sarah reached for the phone, panic flashing across her face. "Don't, please, Emma. If he finds out, he'll—" "He already did." I snapped, my voice cracking. "He took your safety, your dignity, your peace. What more can he take?" For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. Then Sarah broke down completely, her body shaking with sobs. I held her, feeling the tremor in her bones, the same bones that used to carry so much strength. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. Somewhere outside, a dog barked and a car engine revved down the street. The world went on like nothing had happened while mine was unraveling in slow motion. I pulled the blanket over Sarah and tucked it beneath her chin. "We'll go to the hospital," I said firmly. "I'll drive. No one will know." She didn't resist this time, just nodded weakly, whispering, "Don't let him find me." I helped her into my old sedan, covering her face with a scarf. As I started the car, the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the cracked asphalt and the empty road ahead. My hands were cold on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Sarah curled up in the back seat, her eyes closed, the bruises stark under the dim light. For the first time that night, fear gave way to something else rage. Not the wild kind, but the cold, deliberate kind that sits deep in your chest and waits. By the time we reached St. Mary's Hospital, I had made up my mind. Ethan wasn't just going to pay. He was going to be exposed. Every bruise on Sarah's body would speak louder than his lies. Every wound would become evidence. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, "This ends tonight." We pulled into St. Mary's with rain cutting across the windshield like thin knives. The emergency room lights felt too bright after the dark porch. The antiseptic smell and the low murmur of voices made everything feel unreal. Sarah moved like someone who had been emptied out, limbs, slack head dropped, breath shallow. A nurse led us through a curtained door, and Dr. Karen Figueroa met us with a calm that was almost fierce. the kind of quiet competence that turns chaos into facts. She asked a few clipped questions to Sarah, then set to work documenting each injury as if recording evidence in a case she had seen too many times before. Under the glare of the examination lamp, every bruise read like a map, a swollen lip split at the corner, a dark crescent over the left eye, clustered bruises along the ribs that suggested more than a single strike, neat crescents on the forearms consistent with defensive wounds. Figueroa photographed everything on a hospital camera, labeling each file, jotting times, and murmuring the clinical phrases that would later mean the difference between allegation and proof. Nurses moved with practiced precision, checking vitals, drawing blood, ordering x-rays, and the small, ordinary things they did gave the room a structure that steadied me enough to think in straight lines. I kept my hands busy by photographing the injuries with my own phone, framing each shot like I was preserving a declaration. Sarah flinched at every touch and mouthed a string of disclaimers. "Don't call the police. Please? He'll take the kids." But the tremor in her voice eroded whatever argument shame still held. When the technician printed the initial report, the typed words felt both dry and sacred contusions consistent with blunt force trauma. Abrasions consistent with defensive action. No acute fracture identified. I asked for copies in Dr. Tier. Figueroa handed them to me without hesitation, paper after paper that carried the weight of truth in ink. I signed forms, consented to x-rays, and initialed release authorizations. Each signature felt like a small legal promise that we were not letting this be swept away. Meanwhile, Sarah's phone buzzed again and again. Ethan's name lit the screen with a new message. "Don't make me do something you'll regret." I took a photo of the text, saved the timestamp, and backed it up immediately to an encrypted folder on my phone, and then to a secure drive in my bag. Evidence a lawyer friend had once told me is only useful if it survives your panic. It must be unassailable. I copied images 3 times in triplicate and set antivirus encryption, as if the files were fragile cargo. Between the beeps of monitors and the rustle of paper gowns, I made a list, photos, timestamps the neighbor's camera file. Sarah's medical report, the threats we had just captured. I called Mark Ellison and left a breathless message outlining what we had: photographic documentation, a contemporaneous medical report, a clear, threatening text. When Dr. Figueroa reviewed the x-rays and confirmed there were no broken bones but significant soft tissue damage, she set up a referral for follow-up care and insisted on a safety plan. She pressed a card into my hand with a domestic violence hotline, a social worker's number, and a phrase I couldn't stop repeating to myself: document everything. Before we left, she walked with us to the reception desk and quietly explained chain of custody procedures. Keep original files, don't alter photos, preserve devices in their current state. Her voice held an urgency that was not alarmist but exact. It turned medical notes into armor. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, and I carried a manila envelope of copies and a phone full of encrypted backups. The hospital's revolving doors closed behind us like a seal. For the first time since Sarah had collapsed at my doorstep, the enormity of what we had to do settled over me. This would not be solved by sympathy. It would be solved by proof, by meticulous layers of documentation that would cut through the lies he had prepared for us. The hospital released Sarah just before dawn, and by the time I drove her home, the city was beginning to wake delivery trucks on the highway, the first pale smear of sunrise. I made her tea, helped her into bed, and turned off the phone that kept flashing with Ethan's name. For a few hours there was quiet until the world began to twist itself the way abusers make it twist. Around 9, Ethan called my number. His tone was syrup smooth, almost casual. "Hey, Emma. Sarah, okay? She's been a little unstable lately, you know how she gets." I didn't answer. Just let the silence hang. He filled it with the same poison he'd always used, concern disguised as control. "You know she drinks when she's upset. Sometimes she bruises herself. You've seen her. She exaggerates." The words landed like grease on clean glass, leaving a film I couldn't scrub off. He was rewriting reality before my eyes. Within hours, the story spread. A neighbor texted asking if Sarah was having another breakdown. At the grocery store, 2 women whispered near the produce aisle. One of them looked at me and said I heard Ethan's worried sick. Poor guy. I wanted to scream that he wasn't worried, he was calculating. Every rumor, every sympathetic nod toward him was another brick in the wall he built around her. At home, Sarah scrolled through social media with shaking hands. Ethan had posted a photo of the kids at breakfast, his caption reading, "Daddy's trying his best while Mommy gets the help she needs." Hundreds of likes, heart emojis, prayers. The comments blurred together. "Stay strong, Ethan. Mental illness is hard." Sarah stared at the screen until tears splashed onto the phone. "They think I'm crazy," she whispered. "He's making them believe I'm dangerous." I knelt beside her and took the phone from her hand. "Then we give them something else to believe." But even I could feel the weight of the narrative turning against us. The landlord called that afternoon apologetic but firm. Ethan had told him Sarah was violent, that he might need police protection if she came near the house. By evening, I could barely keep track of the lies. It was a net thrown across the town, neighbors, coworkers, even family repeating the same phrases. "She's unstable. He's trying." Each repetition stripped Sarah of credibility, turning truth into something fragile. That night, while she slept, I sat by the window watching headlights slide across the blinds. I remembered what Dr. Figueroa had said, document everything, and I realized that words were as deadly as fists. Gaslighting wasn't just confusion. It was a strategy, a weapon sharpened with charm and influence. I opened my laptop and started cataloging the phone calls, the messages, the online posts, the timestamps. Every lie Ethan told would have a counter record. The world might believe him now, but I was building something he couldn't spin a ledger of truth line by line that would one day undo his entire performance. Sarah barely spoke the next morning. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded around a mug she never drank from, staring through the window as if the world outside belonged to someone else. The bruises had begun to darken into deep purples and yellow edges, the kind that hurt more on the inside than the outside. I tried to coax her to eat, but she only shook her head. "He'll take the kids," she whispered again. Her voice was hollow, scraped thin. "If I go to court, he'll tell everyone I'm unfit. He'll say I'm unstable, and people will believe him." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. Men like Ethan always won at first. They built reputations made of charm and control, then used them like armor. They didn't need to shout to be believed. They just needed you to doubt yourself. I went into my office and closed the door. My laptop was still open from the night before, the screen filled with folders labeled with times and dates, evidence. Each photo, each file was a small rebellion against his version of reality. I opened the folder of hospital photos and looked at Sarah's face, the split lip, the swelling, the terror in her eyes. It hit me that violence doesn't just happen once. It lives in the victim's posture, in the way they shrink from sound, in the apology stitched into every breath. I started typing in a private journal, not for publication, not for proof, just to stay sane. "Abusers control the story. Survivors lose their voice," I wrote. "But silence is a choice too, and it's the one he counts on." I closed the journal and picked up my phone to call Mark Ellison, a civil rights lawyer I knew from college. We hadn't spoken in years, but when he answered, his voice carried that same calm authority I remembered. I told him everything about Sarah, the injuries, the texts, the gaslighting. "I can help," he said, no hesitation. "But you have to be meticulous. Keep the originals, no edits, no social posts. Build the paper trail before you light the match." He promised to come by that afternoon. When I hung up, a strange steadiness settled over me. For the first time since Sarah knocked on my door, I felt something stronger than fear resolve. I went back to her room and found her asleep, clutching a photo of her kids. Her face was soft in rest, but even in sleep, she looked fragile, like the smallest noise could shatter her. I covered her with a blanket and whispered to the air, "You don't have to fight alone anymore." Then I turned off the light and sat in the hallway listening to the quiet. The house felt too still, but beneath the stillness, I could sense it, the shift. The moment before retaliation begins. I wasn't just her sister now. I was her witness, her archivist, and soon I'd be her weapon. Mark Ellison arrived that afternoon carrying a slim leather briefcase and the kind of quiet intensity that made you believe things could still be fixed. His hair had gone grayer since college, but his eyes hadn't lost that lawyer's glint, the look of a man who lived for logic, for evidence, for the fight. I spread the files across my dining table photos, medical reports, timestamps, Ethan's messages, screenshots of his social posts. Mark studied them without speaking for a long time. "He's good," he finally said. "Too good. This kind of control doesn't happen by accident." He pointed to the threatening text. "If you open your mouth, you'll lose everything. That's coercion. And this," he tapped the social media posts, "this is defamation disguised as concern. But it's not enough for a conviction. We'll need something undeniable, something that connects his violence to tangible damage, fraud, falsification, property." I frowned. Property. Mark leaned back. "Most men like Ethan hide their worst crimes under paperwork. Bank transfers, deeds, shell accounts. You said he owns hardware stores. Any joint assets under Sarah's name. I remembered a piece of land Sarah inherited from our grandfather, 40 acres in Bastrop County. She mentioned Ethan wanted to manage it for her," I said slowly. Mark's pen froze mid-note. "Get me the file." Sarah was still resting when I found the folder in her home office tucked between tax returns and family photos. Inside were property transfer documents dated just a week earlier, signed, notarized, sealed. But the signature wasn't hers. The loops, the slant, Ethan had forged it. I felt my chest tighten. "He took it," I whispered. "He actually took it." When Mark saw the papers, his expression hardened. "This changes everything. Forgery and fraud are criminal offenses. If we tie that to the abuse, we're not just dealing with assault, we're dealing with intent and financial exploitation." He outlined the plan, build a dual case, one civil and one criminal. Sarah would file for a protective order. Meanwhile, we'd submit the forged deed to the county recorder as evidence of fraud. But first, he said, we'll need corroboration, a witness. That's when I thought of Mrs. Camila Torres, the neighbor across the street. Her house had a security camera pointed at the road. "She might have footage from that night," I said. Mark nodded. "Get it, and make sure it's time-stamped. Chain of custody will matter." I walked to Camilla's house rehearsing what I'd say. She was in her yard sweeping leaves when I arrived, her gray hair pinned back with a clip that glittered in the sunlight. "I heard some noise that night," she said before I even asked. "Your sister right, poor girl." She pulled out her phone, opened her security app, and showed me the recording. Sarah knocking on my door, collapsing the faint glow of headlights retreating down the street. The timestamp read 1:03 a.m. Camilla pressed play again, shaking her head. I kept the original files. "You take them. I don't trust men like him." I copied the footage onto a flash drive, thanked her, and walked home with the strange feeling of holding power in my palm. When I showed Mark the video, he exhaled sharply. "This is gold," he said. "We've got physical injury, digital threats, financial fraud, and now third-party visual evidence. He can't spin all of it." That night, I organized the documents into a single binder: photos, medical files, the forged deed, the video backup. I labeled each section by date, adding sticky notes for reference. I didn't realize until then how much order soothed me. This wasn't just revenge. It was preparation. As the clock ticked past midnight, Sarah came into the kitchen, pale but awake. "What are you doing?" she asked. I looked at her, then at the binder between us. "I'm building something," I said quietly. "A trap made of truth. And when he walks into it, he'll have nowhere left to run." 2 days later, Mark arranged a preliminary meeting at a downtown law office, a neutral ground where both parties could exchange statements before the court filing. I spent the morning printing duplicates of every document, my fingers stiff from stapling and labeling, until the papers formed a neat stack of facts he could no longer twist. Sarah sat across the table from me, quiet but composed, her bruises fading to a sickly yellow beneath light makeup. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to," I told her. "Just sit beside me. Let him see that you're not afraid anymore." She nodded, gripping my hand. The conference room smelled of coffee and power. Ethan arrived 15 minutes late, wearing an expensive gray suit and that same polished arrogance that used to charm everyone. His lawyer, Hector Valdivia, followed a man whose presence alone seemed to demand silence. Ethan looked at me first, then Sarah. "You look better, sweetheart," he said, as if we were meeting for brunch. I was worried. The way he said it, gentle, rehearsed, made my stomach turn. I didn't answer. Mark spread the documents on the table, his tone professional but icy. "We're here to address the assault, the fraudulent property transfer, and the harassment that followed. We have physical, digital, and testimonial evidence. I suggest you read before responding." Ethan smirked, flipping through the pages with a kind of bored curiosity. "You're overreacting," he said. "My wife." He glanced at Sarah, softening his voice. "She's been under a lot of pressure. She's not well." The word pressure hung in the air like smoke. I could almost hear the invisible gears of manipulation turning. Sarah's fingers tightened around mine. "Stop pretending," she said suddenly, her voice raw. "You hit me, Ethan. You broke everything." His smirk vanished, replaced by something colder. "Watch your tone," he muttered, then turned back to the lawyer. "This is ridiculous. You're wasting everyone's time." Mark didn't flinch. He slid another paper forward, the forged deed. "You recognize this?" Ethan froze. His eyes darted across the page, catching the notary stamp, the false signature that matched his handwriting a little too perfectly. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, his voice rising for the first time. Mark leaned back. "That's exactly what guilty people say. The county registrar will confirm the forgery within the week. You've committed fraud and assault, Mr. Caldwell. This meeting is your only chance to cooperate." Ethan slammed the file shut, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "You think you can threaten me? I own half this town." He turned to Sarah, his voice a snarl hidden under politeness. "You'll regret this, you and your sister both." I stood before he could finish. My voice was steady, colder than I thought it could be. "No, Ethan. You'll regret assuming we were the kind of women who stay quiet." I reached into my folder and pulled out a USB drive, the video from Camila's security camera. I set it on the table between us. "This is you losing everything. Frame by frame." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Valdivia cleared his throat and gathered his papers. "We'll be in touch," he said curtly, steering his client toward the door. But Ethan couldn't help one last glance back. There was something wild in his eyes, rage mixed with disbelief, like a man watching his own reflection shatter. When the door closed, Sarah exhaled shakily. "He's going to come after us." I nodded. "Let him try," I said. "He's already stepped into the trap." Mark gathered the files into his briefcase, giving me a small, grim nod. "He knows he's cornered. Keep every device locked. Don't answer unknown calls." As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred through the windshield. I could still see Ethan's face in my mind that moment when he realized the story was no longer his to control. For the first time in years, Sarah slept through the night. And I stayed awake beside the window, waiting not in fear, but in anticipation of the reckoning that was coming. By the next morning, I knew what had to come next. Ethan had always kept his hands clean by letting someone else do the dirty work, and that someone was Denise Salgado. She was 27, pretty in a calculated way, the kind of woman who measured power by proximity. Sarah had mentioned her name through tears that night, how Ethan paraded her around the office parties, how she once found Denise's lipstick on his jacket collar. It was time to make her talk. Mark warned me to be careful. "She's not innocent," he said, "but she's scared. If you corner her, she'll fight back. If you show her she's expendable, she might switch sides." I found her at a small bar off 6th Street called La Vida, the kind of place where secrets drowned quietly in cheap tequila. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and neon light. Denise was easy to spot: tight red dress, gold hoop earrings, hair sleek and straight. She laughed too loudly with a man at the counter, but her eyes flicked constantly toward the door. Fear and vanity make the same expression when they're cornered. I waited until the man left, then approached her booth. "You don't know me," I said, sliding an envelope across the table. "But you should." She frowned, about to dismiss me, until she saw what was inside: photos of her and Ethan outside a motel time-stamped clear. Beneath them, a copy of the forged land transfer with her signature as witness. Her face drained of color. "What do you want?" she whispered, clutching the papers. "Nothing you can't give," I said evenly. "The truth." She scoffed, trying to recover her confidence. "You think I'm afraid of your little threats. Ethan told me you're crazy, both of you. He said your sister hit herself." I leaned forward until she could smell the steel in my voice. "Then why is your name on the fraud file, Denise? Why did he use you to steal land he never owned?" Her hand trembled. "He said it was already his. He said it was just paperwork." I watched her facade crack piece by piece. "You think he's going to protect you when this goes public? He's going to feed you to the wolves to save himself." I pulled out a phone, showing her the message Ethan had sent Sarah. If you open your mouth, you'll lose everything." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then quietly she whispered, "He hit her, didn't he?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Denise finished her drink in a single swallow. Her lipstick left a perfect red mark on the glass. "If I help you, I want immunity," she said, her voice shaking but steadying at the end. "You tell the truth," I said, standing, "and you'll get something better than immunity. You'll get out." As I left the bar, the night felt electric, charged with the promise of collapse. Denise wasn't loyal, she was scared, and fear was stronger than love in Ethan's world. For the first time, I knew the balance had shifted. His mistress had just become our witness. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city felt restless, humming under the rain. Every car that passed my window made my stomach tighten. Around midnight, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. No caller ID. I hesitated, then answered. Silence. Then a man's voice, low and cold, like a blade sliding against glass. "You should have stayed out of it, Emma." Click. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, heart pounding, every nerve alive with dread. My first thought was Ethan. My second was that he wasn't bluffing anymore. I turned on the lamp and scanned the street from the window. A black SUV sat idling across the road, headlights off, just enough to make its presence clear. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and hit record, zooming in until the license plate came into focus. Document everything. I repeated it like a mantra. When I woke, Sarah, her face went pale. "He's watching us," she whispered, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "He said if I ever turned him in, he'd come for you too." I put my hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "He's losing control. That's why he's desperate. Men like him, they only look powerful until you stop being afraid." Still, I didn't take chances. I sent the recording of the SUV to Mark, then called Commander Rosales, a detective Mark trusted. I gave him everything: the forged deed, the texts, the threats, the video, the plate number. His voice was rough but reassuring. "I'll dispatch a patrol car to watch the street. Keep your doors locked. If he steps 1 foot near that house, we'll have him." By dawn, the SUV was gone, but my nerves weren't. I made coffee hands, trembling so badly I spilled half of it. Sarah sat silently at the table, staring at the steam rising from her cup. When her phone buzzed again, she flinched. The message preview showed Ethan's name and a single sentence. "You think you've won?" I grabbed the phone before she could answer. "He's taunting you," I said, my voice low. "He wants to see you react. Don't give him the satisfaction." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "How do you fight someone who controls every narrative?" I looked down at my laptop screen, where folders of evidence glowed like quiet, contained fire. By building one, he can't rewrite. Later that morning, Rosales called. His team had confirmed the plate number the SUV was registered to one of Ethan's employees. "He's sending people to intimidate you," he said. "But that's also witness tampering. We'll add it to the list." For the first time, the law felt like it was standing beside us, not miles ahead. That evening, I went to Camila's house and asked if she'd seen anything unusual. "Just shadows," she said softly, "and fear in your eyes, Mija. But fear doesn't last forever." When I got home, Sarah was asleep on the couch. I stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker against the damp asphalt. The silence outside felt heavy but different, less like danger, more like anticipation. I realized Ethan was unraveling one layer at a time. And underneath all his charm and control, he was just a man terrified of losing power. The difference was now I knew exactly how to take it from him. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and coffee that morning, the scent of too many lives waiting for judgment. Sarah sat beside me in the corridor, her hands clasped so tightly I could see her knuckles whiten. She wore a long-sleeved navy dress that hid the last traces of her bruises, but nothing could hide the tremor in her breathing. I brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You don't have to look at him," I said quietly. "Just breathe. You already survived the hardest part." The bailiff opened the doors and we stepped into the courtroom. Rows of wooden benches were filled, neighbors, reporters, even faces from Ethan's business circle. At the front, Judge Arturo Cervantes adjusted his glasses, his gaze calm but sharp. The hum of whispers fell into silence. Ethan sat at the defense table, immaculate in a charcoal suit, his lawyer Valdivia beside him. He looked up as we entered and smiled a slow, deliberate smile that sent ice down my spine. When the hearing began, Mark rose first. His tone was calm, but cut clean as glass. Your Honor, this case is not about rumor or resentment. It is about violence, coercion, and calculated fraud. He turned on the projector, and the first image filled the screen, Sarah's hospital photographs. The room gasped. The bruises, the split lip, the swelling, they spoke louder than any words. Mark continued layering evidence piece by piece: the medical report, the time-stamped text messages, the video from Camilla's camera showing Sarah collapsing at my door at 1:03 a.m. This, he said, is what domestic violence looks like when the world isn't watching. Valdivia rose for the defense, his voice smooth, almost mocking. Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman. The plaintiff has a history of emotional instability. The so-called evidence is circumstantial. A camera caught a woman outside her sister's door, not a crime. He handed the judge a folder. Here, statements from neighbors who confirm that Mrs. Caldwell was seen drinking heavily that night. Sarah's eyes welled, her shoulders shaking. I leaned forward, whispering, "Don't break. Let him bury himself." Mark didn't hesitate. Your Honor. He said we anticipated this line of defense. He projected a second set of images: the forged property deed, the notary's signature, and the authentication letter from the county registrar confirming the fraud. This isn't a rumor. This is a felony. Ethan's jaw tightened. His hand twitched on the table. Valdivia shifted uneasily. Then came the final witness, Denise. She entered the courtroom in a gray coat, her face pale but composed. Ethan's eyes widened. The air seemed to thicken. She hesitated before the bench, then raised her right hand. Her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. Ethan told me he forged the papers. He said Sarah would never notice. He made me sign as a witness, said it was just a formality. Ethan shot to his feet. You lying? Mr. Caldwell, sit down, the judge barked. The bailiff stepped forward. Denise swallowed hard. He told me he hit her because she made him look weak. I didn't believe him at first, but when I saw her at the hospital, I knew he'd do it again. The courtroom buzzed with gasps and whispers. Ethan slumped back into his chair. Face, pale eyes darting between us like an animal caught in its own snare. Mark approached the bench one last time. Your Honor, this is not the image of a husband defending his family. This is the profile of a predator who manipulates, defrauds, and destroys. The law can no longer look away. Judge Cervantes removed his glasses and leaned forward. His voice was steady. The court finds sufficient evidence to issue a restraining order against Mr. Caldwell, to nullify the fraudulent property transfer, and to refer the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution on charges of assault and fraud. The gavel struck once. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Ethan slumped forward, face drained, the last trace of charm gone. The bailiff moved toward him as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah let out a small, broken sob, the kind that sounded like relief and grief tangled together. I took her hand and helped her stand. As we walked out of the courtroom, flashes from reporters' cameras sparked around us. Someone whispered, "Justice." Another voice added, "Finally." Outside, the sun was blinding. The courthouse steps gleamed wet from morning rain, and for the first time in months, Sarah lifted her face toward the light. "Is it over?" she asked. I looked at her. My sister, fragile and fierce, still trembling but free, and shook my head softly. "Not over," I said. "Just beginning, but this time it's our story they'll believe." Behind us, the courthouse doors closed. Somewhere inside, Ethan's world was collapsing one lie at a time. By the next morning, the entire town had seen his mugshot. It was everywhere on Facebook, the local paper, even the evening news. Businessman Ethan Caldwell arrested for assault and fraud. The same people who once whispered that Sarah was unstable now whispered something else entirely, that they never really liked him, that they always suspected something. Hypocrisy moves fast when the tide turns. I watched it unfold from the porch coffee cooling in my hands. Across the street, Mrs. Camilla waved from her yard. "Justice takes time, mija," she called out, "but it always comes home." I smiled faintly. Inside, Sarah was still asleep. She'd spent most of the night trembling from nightmares, but at least this time when she woke screaming, it wasn't from fear of him breaking down the door, it was from memories, and memories can be softened. Later that day, Mark came by with a thick folder. "The DA's office is filing formal charges," he said, setting it on the table. Forgery, assault, and intimidation. He'll stay in custody until trial. His lawyer's already negotiating a plea deal, but with Denise's statement, it's airtight. I let the words settle in. And the property, restored to Sarah's name this morning, he said, smiling faintly. The clerk expedited the paperwork. I think the judge wanted to make a point. I felt something unclench inside me, a knot I didn't know I'd been holding for weeks. Thank you, I said softly. Mark nodded. You did this, Emma, you and your sister. Most women never get this far. He left soon after, but his words stayed. That night, Sarah joined me on the porch. She was barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, somehow softer. They say he'll be sentenced next month, she said quietly. I nodded. He will, and even if he gets out, he won't get to touch your life again. For a while, we sat in silence, listening to the wind brush through the trees. Then she spoke again, almost whispering. You know, I used to dream about leaving him, but every time I tried to imagine it, I saw his face and everyone smiling convincing. He made me believe I was the crazy one. I reached over and took her hand. That's what monsters do. They steal your mirror until you can't recognize yourself. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Do you think I'll ever stop being afraid? Maybe not, I said, but one day it won't control you anymore. Fear only stays if you keep feeding it. The next morning I drove her to a therapy appointment with Dr. Kuroga. Sarah walked through the doors on her own this time. No shaking hands, no hesitation, just quiet determination. Watching her go, I realized how much she'd changed, not healed, not yet, but reclaiming herself piece by piece. On the way home, I passed Ethan's pawn shop. It was boarded up now, property seized, spray-painted across the window by the sheriff's office. A crowd of onlookers stood nearby, some taking photos, others gossiping. For once, I didn't care what they said. Let them talk. Every word was another nail sealing the coffin of his reputation. That night, I sat by the window with a fresh notebook. The pages smelled clean, untouched. At the top, I wrote, Documentation of Survival. Caldwell case. Not for evidence, not anymore. For memory. Because stories like ours don't end with headlines, they end when we write them ourselves. Outside, the town hummed with a new quiet. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't roar. It whispered patient and sure. And for the first time in months, when I finally turned off the light, I didn't listen for footsteps. I slept. A month later, Sarah's laughter returned, not loud, not like before, but soft and careful, like someone testing a new language. It started one afternoon when we were cooking together. The smell of onions and cilantro filled the kitchen sunlight streaming through the window. She was cutting tomatoes when she suddenly said, You know, Mom used to make us do this when we fought. I smiled. Yeah, forced reconciliation through tacos. She laughed, a sound that startled both of us. For a moment, it felt like time reversed back to when her world hadn't yet been defined by bruises. The trial came and went quickly after Denise's testimony. Ethan pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence. 5 years for fraud, 3 for domestic assault served consecutively. He'd be gone for a while. The morning of sentencing, Sarah and I sat in the courtroom again. When they brought him in wearing handcuffs, he looked smaller somehow, as if the arrogance had been stripped away along with his freedom. He didn't look at Sarah, didn't speak. The judge read the sentence and the room erupted in murmurs. But Sarah didn't flinch. She stood spine straight, and when the bailiffs led him away, she whispered something under her breath. Later, she told me it was, You can't hurt me anymore. Afterward, she joined a support group. Dr. Kuroga recommended a circle of women who spoke softly at first, then fiercely. Each story was a wound unstitched and cleaned in public. Sarah came home after every session drained but lighter. It helps, she told me one night, hearing them, realizing it's not just me. Healing didn't look like triumph. It looked like repetition, waking up, making breakfast, folding laundry, remembering she could exist without apology. One evening, I found her on the porch with a notebook. What's that? I asked. She smiled faintly. Letters I'll never send, she said. To him, to me, to the woman I used to be. She flipped a page and read aloud. I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I felt a sting behind my eyes. She was reclaiming her narrative one sentence at a time. By spring, she'd started volunteering at the local women's shelter. They need someone to help with accounting, she said almost shyly. But I knew it was more than that. It was her way of closing the circle, turning pain into purpose. Sometimes I'd drive by and see her through the window, kneeling beside a new arrival offering tea, listening. That look in her eyes, it was the same fierce tenderness I remembered from before Ethan. The house changed too. We replaced the broken porch light, painted the living room, filled it with things that didn't carry ghosts, plants, candles, framed photos from before everything fractured. The silence that used to feel heavy now felt peaceful. On weekends, we'd drive to the edge of town to the field that used to be our grandfather's, the land Ethan tried to steal. The grass had grown tall, bending in the wind, golden under the sun. "I want to build something here," Sarah said once her eyes steady. "A retreat. A place where women can breathe again." I looked at her standing barefoot in the field wind in her hair, sunlight on her scarred but unbroken face, and thought, this is what victory looks like. Not vengeance, not ruin, just life defiantly continuing. That night, as I sat writing in my journal, I realized something. Justice isn't a single act. It's a process, a rhythm. You chase it through fear, through doubt, until one morning you wake up and realize it's no longer about revenge, it's about freedom. And Sarah, my sister, had finally found hers. 6 months later, the air in Austin carried the scent of rain and new beginnings. The world felt different, lighter somehow, even though the scars still lingered in both of us. Sarah had moved into her own apartment across town, a small sunlit space above a flower shop. She decorated it with second-hand furniture and wildflowers from the farmer's market. On her first night there, she sent me a photo of a single lamp glowing in the corner captioned "Home." Finally mine. I stared at it for a long time, realizing that what I felt wasn't worry, it was pride. We still spoke every day. Some nights, she called just to talk about the mundane recipes, work the stray cat that started visiting her balcony, and sometimes when her voice went quiet, I knew she was remembering. The courtroom, the bruises, the nights she couldn't breathe. But memory had softened around the edges. It no longer owned her. "I don't wake up afraid anymore," she told me once. "I still dream about him, but in those dreams he's small. Smaller than me." One Sunday, we visited our grandfather's field again. The grass was waist-high now, the soil warm under our shoes. Sarah walked ahead, her hair catching the sun, and stopped near the old oak tree. "This land survived generations," she said softly. "And so did we." I took her hand, the wind rustling through the branches above us. "You turned your pain into proof," I said. "That's how the cycle ends." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I used to think justice meant seeing him punished, but it's more than that. It's seeing myself still standing after he tried to erase me." I smiled. "Justice isn't revenge, Sarah, it's restoration." That evening, after dropping her off, I took a drive alone. The roads shimmered in the orange glow of dusk, and the radio played softly, an old song about forgiveness, about finding your way home. I thought about everything we'd lost, everything we'd rebuilt, about how courage often looks quiet, domestic, unremarkable, like two sisters sitting on a porch, mending the world one truth at a time. When I reached home, I found a letter in the mailbox addressed to me, no return name. Inside was a short note written in a tight, masculine hand. "You ruined my life, but I guess I deserved it. No signature, but I didn't need one." I folded the paper carefully and placed it in the same binder that once held the evidence, the bruises, the threats, the proof. The story was whole now, and I decided it would stay there sealed. That night, I sat at my desk, writing in my journal again. 6 months ago, I thought justice was the end of the story. Now I understand it's the beginning of healing, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers in every small act of survival. Before turning off the light, I walked to the window. The street was quiet, the kind of stillness that used to terrify me because it meant waiting for danger. But now it meant something else. It meant peace. Down the block, Mrs. Camila's porch light flickered, and I remembered her words from that first night. "Justice takes time, mija, but it always comes home." I whispered a thank you to the dark, not for the pain, but for the lesson it carved into us that even in the ruins of cruelty, something resilient can grow. Something like forgiveness. Something like hope. A year passed before I truly understood what survival meant. It wasn't a clean victory. It was a collection of moments stitched together by persistence. Sarah's new life became its own quiet rebellion. She'd built a career helping other women navigate legal paperwork for protective orders using the same binder structure we'd once built for her case. She called it Project Second Voice. Every time she helped a woman file a report or secure a restraining order, she was rewriting the narrative that had almost silenced her. One afternoon, she invited me to the first workshop she hosted at the Women's Center. The small community room smelled of coffee and lavender candles, and about 20 women sat in folding chairs, notebooks on their laps. Sarah stood at the front, nervous but steady, her voice clear. "They tell us we're dramatic," she began, "that we exaggerate, that we bruise easy or break things ourselves. But documentation doesn't lie. Truth doesn't need permission." Her eyes met mine across the room, and I could see it the woman she had become. Strong, compassionate, unafraid to take up space. When the women applauded, her lips trembled not from fear, but from pride. Afterward, we walked to the cafe across the street. She stirred sugar into her coffee and said softly, "Do you ever think about him?" I hesitated. Sometimes I admitted, but not with anger anymore. More like studying a scar. "It's there, but it doesn't ache." She nodded. "I got a letter from his lawyer. He wants early parole." I looked up sharply. "And," she smiled faintly, "denied. The judge said he still shows no remorse." We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the sidewalks gold. "Do you hate him?" she asked finally. I shook my head. "No. Hate gives him space in your heart. You've reclaimed too much to let him rent it again." Later that evening, we drove out to the old family land one more time. The retreat Sarah dreamed about was already taking shape, a small foundation laid, the first beams rising from the earth. A sign read, "The Haven, a safe start for women." She ran her hand along the wood eyes shimmering. "It feels unreal," she whispered, "like planting peace where pain used to live." I took a photo Sarah standing in the golden light wind, lifting her hair, a faint smile on her face. It wasn't a victory photo, it was a legacy one, proof that something good could grow from the ashes of everything cruel. That night, I framed the photo and hung it in my living room beside the binder that once held all the evidence. I'd kept it not as a reminder of trauma, but as a record of triumph, a testament that the truth, when fought for, can outlast fear. Before bed, I wrote one final entry in my journal. Justice is not a verdict. It's a chain reaction, a ripple that begins the moment someone decides silence is no longer protection. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and stood by the window. The moonlight fell softly on the street, calm and safe. Somewhere beyond it, women were still whispering their stories, still finding courage in the dark. And maybe I thought that was the real ending, not the punishment of a man, but the awakening of 1,000 voices refusing to disappear. As the night deepened, I whispered the same words that had carried us through every battle. "You can't hurt us anymore." Then I smiled, knowing they weren't just Sarah's words, now they were mine too.